It is our pleasure and joy and honor to ask him to come up and share with us. Kelly?
Thank you, Marcia. It is a joy and a pleasure to be here. It's a real honor. I would like to take the opportunity to thank Reverend Pam for asking me to speak this morning. And as she mentioned, I have taken to showing up on Monday mornings for the meditation here. It's become really a kind of a highlight of my week, and I just so love being included in this community in that way. And we call that sometimes the Kennel Club meditation, as Reverend Pam typically brings her dog Smokey, and sometimes I bring my dog Bella. We are certainly open to other humans showing up and joining us. So if you are so inclined, show up on a Monday at 9. We have a great time with it, and really kind of a special thing for me. I would also like to thank friends of mine that are here today. I'm kind of understanding what it feels like to be a rock star because I have groupies here this morning. I never thought I would see the day that I have groupies. At any rate, my name is Kelly Brzezinski. As has been mentioned, I'm a religious science practitioner from Global Truth Center, what was Center for Spiritual Living, Westlake Village. And I am also a ministerial student. I just completed my first year of ministerial studies. I took our final exam on Thursday night. Still a year to go, but working feverishly on that goal. And it's just a joy to be here and to be included in some small way in your community today. And what I want to talk about is an experience that I had a couple years ago, a couple summers ago, in fact, the summer of 2017. I was married in July 2017. My partner's here today, so I hope I get this date right, but we were married, I believe, on July 7th, 2017.
That's right.
And I had also taken to planning a family reunion each summer, and it turned into kind of a big deal. We had between 50 and 85 people at those events, and taken it in different parts around the country. That particular summer, I had planned a family reunion up in the mountains of Colorado, outside of Steamboat Springs, Colorado. My mother was born and raised there, and I have lifelong ties to that area, and it's just a glorious place for me. Lots of childhood memories and that sort of thing. So about 10 days or 2 weeks after we were married, we did our first big road trip together. And we're in the car and headed for Steamboat Springs and did that, spent a couple days there, and then went up about 30 miles up in the mountains outside of Steamboat to a place called the Columbine Cabins. And we had our reunion there, and I don't know, 50 or 60 people there that year. And it was just incredible. We had the time of our life, just amazing time. And on the way back, on the road trip home, we had decided that there was an excursion that we wanted to do. And it was a place that neither of us had been. Had to do a little bit of a detour, go out of our way a little bit. But we chose to do that. And that excursion is Bryce National Park in Utah. And you may have heard of it, or you may have been there, or seen photos. And if not, I'm going to show you a couple photos. I have a few slides today, just because I want you, if you haven't been there or haven't seen photos, I want you to have sort of a visual so that you'll understand more and more about what I'm talking about this morning. And so, Bryce is this incredible place. Bryce is this incredible place in the desert of Utah. And this is just sort of a panorama of it. It's really known for these sort of freestanding spires here. And you hear many people call this Bryce Canyon. I was informed when I was there not to call it a canyon because it's not. It's apparently a plateau. And great offense was taken to that verbiage that day. There numerous articles and stories written about Bryce and the otherworldly features of it. And if you can see this, you can see sort of the almost human-like characteristics of some of these towers, some of the spires. And these freestanding spires are called hoodoos. It was not a word that I was familiar with, but they are called hoodoos. And Bryce is said to be the largest collection of hoodoos on planet Earth. And this is really kind of an incredible shot. Alfie and I saw this. We nicknamed this the Lovers because they just look to me like they're just there sharing this eternal embrace. But I think it also illustrates how hoodoos come into being. So what happens over time is that the earth washes away, leaving these holes, these crevices through which light can be seen. And those holes are called windows. The Lovers, I suppose, are not technically classified as hoodoos because for that to happen, that top layer of crust above the window has to break away to leave that tower freestanding. And then it's called a hoodoo. And one final shot, which I think is stunning. This in Bryce is known as Thor's hammer. But I love this shot because it just looks to me like this amazing sculpture is just standing here observing life far above the fray and far above any sort of concern or worry or upset, and just watching life, as Reverend Betty Ann said, just unfold perfectly no matter what. And that's what that looks like to me. So those are my shots of Bryce, and that will lead me then into the talk about Bryce. And so we had left Colorado and drove and did our little detour and made it to the area where Bryce is located. And we drove all day and we arrived at night. It was dark already, so we rented a room and stayed the night, got up the next morning, drove out to Bryce National Park, bought our tickets, got on a shuttle bus that takes you into the park, and the shuttle bus will drop you off and you spend as much time in each location as you like and just catch the next bus. And we did that and hiked down into the hoodoos and that sort of thing. But I had an experience that day at Bryce that I have never had before, that has never happened for me simply as the result of looking at what is certainly an incredible landscape. But the experience I had that day that was so brand new for me is that numerous times throughout that day, I would be on an overlook and just checking out this place, and for whatever reason, the tears welled up in my eyes and just poured down my face. I have never had that happen, and as slightly as embarrassing as it is to admit that, that's what happened for me that day. This place impacted me in an incredible way. And so imagine the scene. Here I am, newlywed, overlooking Bryce, tears running down my face, tourists walking by snapping photos, and I am hoping to goodness they're taking pictures of the park and not of me. With my partner there, having clearly developed second thoughts about this deal with his partner standing there bawling his eyes out at this landscape. But that's how it hit me. And it took me a long time to understand why, to understand what is it that prompted this reaction within me simply at the witnessing of this beautiful location. And I didn't figure it out that day. In fact, I had to bring this experience home. I had to sit with it. I had to take it into meditation and really put some thought into what is it that's going on within me? What caused this? And it took some time, but here is what I discovered about that, is that I certainly felt at home here. I felt drawn to this area. I felt drawn to its beauty. I was certainly moved by what I saw that day. But what moved me and impacted me at the deepest level was not what I saw, but was what could not be seen. And for me, what could not be seen was the how. How Bryce came to be what it is. How this incredible place of beauty came to be. And for me, the how of that are the storms. The storms. So for thousands of years, for centuries and centuries, this beauty always existed. It was always there. As long as that land was land, and as long as this earth has been earth, that beauty already existed. But it took centuries of storms, of blistering sun in the summer, and of rain and snow and winds to allow what is to come forth, to allow that level of beauty to be seen. And that is what impacted me that day. And I came away knowing that in the absence of the storm, without those centuries of pounding rains and snows and all those things, without the storms, Bryce would certainly be something, but it would not be what it is today. And that was really a moving thing to me. So there's a quote from the French writer Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. And he says this. He says that perfection is achieved not when there is nothing more to add, but when there is nothing left to take away. And those storms took everything away that was not required for this level of beauty to be seen. That's what impacted me so much. And so, as has been mentioned, my talk title is The Perfect Storm. And if I were to subtitle it, I would probably call it The Perfect Storm and Being Shaped by Life. And so that takes me to a couple of questions for all of us, really. And my questions are this. In your own life, in your world, what storms have you faced? What storms have you faced, and how have you faced them? How have you gone through them? Have you crafted your ability? Have you honed your ability to, as the shot of Thor's hammer a minute ago, to stand in the face of life and just allow it to happen, welcoming everything? Or, when those storms show up, do you try to shield yourself from them? Do you seek shield? Do you look for a way to cover yourself up, to harden yourself, to form some top layer of crust through which the storm can't break through as a measure of protection? And I want to share also a personal storm from my life, and this is from a number of years ago. Had moved to this area, had moved to Thousand Oaks originally when I moved to this area, and I spent 7 years in a relationship with someone. And the truth be told, we probably were both already aware that this relationship really no longer served the best interests of either of us. Yet we had a lot of life and a lot of time and invested in this thing. And so we weren't really willing to admit that, to talk about it, to deal with it in any meaningful way. And so as it does, when I'm not really willing to deal with it, life will do something to make sure that I do. And have you had that experience? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so life conjured up a storm and sent it my way, is what happened. And so the demise of this relationship came about from the knowledge that there were things happening in this relationship, or more specifically outside the relationship, that were clearly a violation of the agreements between us about being in a relationship together. And it was a storm for me. It was a storm for me, and in that situation, I became a victim. I absolutely became a victim, and my partner was the perpetrator, at least in my mind, and I developed this huge feeling of blame around this thing. I pointed my finger, I blamed, And I'll tell you what, that is one thing I have a knack for. When I put my mind to it, I'm really good at that thing called the blame game. And I spent a lot of time at it. I talked to everybody I knew. I talked to my friends and my family, and I told this story over and over about what was happening and what was being done and how horribly I was being treated. And it felt to me like I would eventually tell this story enough times that it could pass, and that I would be past these really heavy and strong feelings around it. But that was not my experience. It didn't seem to be lightening, unfortunately. In fact, it seemed to be worsening. It seemed to become heavier and heavier and heavier, to the point that it was just absolutely consuming me. And I could scarcely think of anything else. And so I did something that I had never done to that point in my life, sort of because I didn't know what else to do. And I was at the center on a Sunday morning, and someone mentioned meeting with a practitioner, like Marcia just mentioned. And so I went to see a practitioner that week. Had never done that, but I will tell you, it was an incredible process, and I came away from that practitioner session changed. I came away with new knowledge and with new understanding. I can't tell you that everything was rosy and it was just easy from there on. There was work to do for sure. But I came away with that knowing something. So we talked, but this fabulous practitioner did something that I hadn't anticipated, because I laid on her this story, and my story of blame and my story of victimhood and all that stuff, and she had the audacity not to agree with me. I was a little bit offended, I was upset by that, because I thought it was very clear that I was a victim in this situation. And she told me that she said, I absolutely refuse to see you as a victim. And she did a spiritual mind treatment for me, and coming out of that, I had a definite understanding of something that I'd never realized before. And what I understood from that situation is that I was not a victim, that life wasn't doing this to me, it was doing it for me. And I'd never thought about that before, but it was doing it for me because I could have spent a lifetime in that relationship that was clearly no longer fulfilling and no longer meeting my needs or expectations. So when I wouldn't do it for myself, life did it for me, and that was an incredible realization for me. Wasn't doing it to me, it was doing it for me. While it felt sometimes like a dagger to the heart, I understood that life was not cutting me, it was carving me. It was carving me, it was shaping me. It was polishing me somehow into a better version of myself. Into a version where I could see things in a different light. I could see my partner in a different light. I could venture into this territory called forgiveness. And so you may be sitting there thinking, wow, if this is the polished version, what the heck did he look like before? Well, let me put your mind at ease. Life is not finished with me yet. I'm still a work in progress. There's more to come. More polish to be had. So I want to be clear, though. If you are you all now excited to go out and experience some real hardship and heartache so as to practice your spiritual principles? Well, not so much, right? Well, that's also not what I'm suggesting. But here's what I am suggesting. I am suggesting that it always comes back to choice. And I've heard that so often, I get a little tired of it sometimes. Sometimes I just want it to be easy and not to have to choose or put in any effort or work. But it all comes back to choice. I know that I would never wish hardship or heartache on anybody. But I also know we have choice about how we go through those things, how we allow them to affect us, how we participate in those difficulties, in those storms of life. And I also don't know anybody that gets through this life without experiencing some of those things. So why not do the best that we can do with it? Why not make the absolute best that we can make with it? Because I know that I had this conversation with my friend Donna, who was here this morning, maybe a couple months ago, and that was about sometimes it seems like life really isn't fair. And it may not be fair. Life may not always be fair, but it's always life. It's always life. It is unfolding perfectly, no matter what. We talk about this in religious science all the time. This is one of the tenets of our philosophy. It unfolds in the magnificent ways that it unfolds. Those magnificent ways are not infrequently contrary to my opinions about how it should unfold, but it unfolds how it does, and it is perfect, no matter what. So our founder, Dr. Ernest Holmes, I want to share a quote from him, and this is in The Science of Mind. It is all the way back in the glossary under the term called divine principle. I'm not going to share the entire definition that is listed there, but I've excerpted it. And Ernest Holmes says this, and he's talking divine principle, and you can think of that as the principle of life, that which keeps everything moving forward, life itself unfolding. And he says this: place no limit on principle. It answers every question, solves every problem, is the solution to every difficulty. We are limited not by principle, but by our ability to see perfection. That's what makes those storms so difficult. That's what makes them so difficult to weather. That's why they sometimes weather us as opposed to our weathering them, is that we have a really tough time at seeing the storm as perfection. So what is perfect about the storm anyway? How can I stand here and talk about really difficult situations, heart-wrenching things, anguish, those things that none of us would prefer to go to? How is it that I would make the claim that any of that is perfect? Well, it is all life unfolding. Certainly it's perfect from that level. But here's what I really understand about this concept is that when that storm of life rushes through and rips a hole in your heart, it's not doing it to you, it's doing it for you. And that hole is not meant to be covered up or filled in or ignored or repaired. Much like those windows that we saw from Bryce, much like those windows, that hole is an opening. It's an opening into which I can look, into which I can peer, into which I can see ever more deeply my absolute perfection, my divine essence, that place within that has never for 1 second been harmed or violated. It is an opening so that I can look more deeply in and have a greater understanding of God is, I am. It's also an opening so all of that God is, I am, that divine essence, that infinite mind can shine forth from me and maybe help somebody else. So that is what I find perfect about the storm. And I will simply say this in closing. No, they're not easy, but they are life. But absolutely anything and everything that inspires me or prompts me or moves me to look more deeply inside and to know myself at a greater level, to know that divinity within, to know myself as that, absolutely anything and everything that does that for me is the very definition of perfection. Happy Sunday, everybody. Thank you for including me in your day. Namaste.